British documentarian Alex Holder met with House investigators just a little while ago. Holder says he complied with the subpoena and he turned over hours of never-before-seen footage of then-President Trump and his family and inner circle before and after the January 6th attack on the Capitol. This hour, we're going to give you a first look at some of that footage that we have obtained, including interviews with Trump 2 months after the attack in which he defended the Capitol rioters, and video of then Vice President Mike Pence reacting in real time to congressional calls for him to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove Donald Trump from office just days after the insurrection. Also featured interviews with Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner, including the first daughter claiming that her father's goal was to have every vote counted, even as he was actually trying to do the exact opposite, trying to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 election and throw out votes from people who might not have voted for him. Filmmaker Alex Holder had extensive access to the 2020 Trump campaign for this documentary that's going to air later this summer on the streaming service Discovery Plus, which we should note shares the same parent company as CNN, Discovery. Discovery Plus provided these clips to CNN. So let's take a look now at our first clip from Alex Holder's documentary. What you're going to see is part of an interview with then Vice President Mike Pence on January 12th. That's the day that the House of Representatives approved a resolution urging Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove Donald Trump from the office of president. Take a look.
I join the Senate Democratic leader in calling on the Vice President to remove this president by immediately invoking the 25th Amendment. If the Vice President and Cabinet do not act, the Congress may be prepared to move forward with impeachment.
Oh. 748.
That's when I received it, but the House members got it a while back.
Yeah, excellent. Tell Zach to print me off a hard copy for the trip home.
Sure.
Great. I'm always hopeful about America. I always believe that America's best days are yet to come, and I still believe that.
All right, so that is a first look at an excerpt from Alex Holder's documentary. The documentarian met with the House committee today. Dana, it is interesting to see Vice President Pence receive in real time an alert that the House of Representatives was demanding that he invoke the 25th Amendment on January 12th and remove Donald Trump from power.
He asked about the time, that he saw the timestamp on the email that that aide was, or text or whatever it was that the aide was showing him, clearly wanting to know whether or not they got a heads up about it or whether it went out publicly. That's certainly how I read that. But also, remember, this was after the trauma of January 6th, a couple of days later. And he's Mike Pence. I mean, he is so calm and intentionally not emoting. Most times, Mike Pence is like that in public and in private. That is Mike Pence. But it also struck me that he is somebody who kind of grew up around broadcasting. He was a radio guy before he was in political office, and he was keenly aware that the camera and the microphone were on.
The camera's rolling. This was 6 days after the insurrection, so that traumatic day, and also the deaths that followed, because remember, not only did people die that day, Trump supporters and Officer Sicknick, but there were several police officers who committed suicide either because of the trauma or traumatic brain injury that they'd suffered during the attack.
You know, on the one hand, I would say don't play poker with this man. On the other, considering the timing of it, January 12th, that he is having this, it seems surreal that he is so emotionless at it. What does he say? Yeah, excellent. The cough, everything. Look, obviously the music in the documentary adds a certain emotion to it, but I think it is, sorry about that, it's quite something to see in real time when he knew how much pressure he was under.
The thing is also, I mean, we know based on what other cabinet secretaries have said that the conversation about the 25th Amendment was happening behind the scenes. So I think it's unlikely that this would have been
From the beginning of the Trump presidency, by the way.
From the beginning of the Trump presidency, but certainly in that time period after January 6th. So it would be, I'm curious to know, how did that coincide? Were there conversations privately happening behind the scenes with Pence about his role in invoking the 25th Amendment, with other cabinet secretaries, including some who resigned in that period of time? Pence, though, in that clip, is, as Dana says, that's Pence in public and in private. The filmmakers say in that clip, which if you're listening to this, you probably didn't see it, he declined to talk about January 6th. That tells you everything you need to know about where his head was at in those days after the attack. Even after all that he experienced, he still wasn't willing to go there, to even be in a position to criticize President Trump.
It's visual evidence of the straitjacket Mike Pence put himself in for the entire Trump presidency, trying to stay calm, trying to use his talking points, I believe the best of America, best days are ahead, because he's surrounded by chaos constantly from day one. And to Abby's point, it's that he won't talk about January 6th. Now Mike Pence has made a clear break from Donald Trump on that day. Even then, he was still not sure. What is in my best political interest? Not going to talk about it. Going to be careful.
So one thing I do want to note before we go on to the next clip is this is the letter that Vice President Pence wrote to Speaker Pelosi, in which he says, no, I'm not going to invoke the 25th Amendment. He says, last week I did not yield to pressure to exert power beyond my constitutional authority to determine the outcome of the election, and I will not now yield to efforts in the House of Representatives to play political games at a time so serious in the life of our nation. He says that the Trump administration's energy is directed to ensuring an orderly transition, which it might be true for him, but was not true for a lot of other people, including Donald Trump. And he said, I urge you and every member of Congress to avoid actions that would further divide and inflame the passions of the moment. So, in other words, he was both sidesing what happened. Like, I can't believe you're talking about this. But let's take a look now at another portion of this documentary from Alex Holder. It's an interview with Donald Trump. This is after the insurrection. This is in March 2021 at his Florida home, Mar-a-Lago.
Can we talk for a minute about January 6th?
Yeah.
Well, it was a sad day, but it was a day where there was great anger in our country. The people went to Washington primarily because they were angry with an election that they think was rigged. A very small portion, as you know, went down to the Capitol, and then a very small portion of them went in. But I will tell you, they were angry from the standpoint of what happened in the election, because they're smart and they see and they saw what happened. And I believe that that was a big part of what happened on January 6th.
That's actually pretty restrained. He's justifying the criminality and the insurrectionists. He's downplaying what they were trying to do. They were just expressing anger. They were not just expressing anger. They were there to stop the counting of electoral votes, to give the presidency to Donald Trump, to steal it.
Yeah, and he was talking as if it just happened in a place far away from anything that he did or said, or now that we are seeing tried to coordinate with the people around him. They didn't just get angry. He made them angry by telling them lies. And he's not separated from that, even though he's trying to separate himself from. That is classic Donald Trump. He knows, because he did this his entire life, if you say something enough times, and if you sell whatever you're trying to sell, whether it's an idea or a product, enough times the same way, he can get people to sign on.
I mean, let's be honest, it's pretty outrageous that there was not one word of condemnation about what happened on January 6th that came out of his mouth at that time. But it's also notable that that position that Trump had then in the months after January 6th is actually the position that has been adopted by many Republicans today, many lawmakers on Capitol Hill, which is to say, oh, it was just a few people, ignoring totally the violence and the intent here, which was to stop the peaceful transfer of power. This is a portrait of a former president who is still cultivating what he described as anger on that day. And that is, I think, what the committee, as we're going through these hearings, wants to reiterate to the American public. It's what Judge Ludig said, the clear and present danger for the future, a former president who is not remorseful, but is also still stirring up the anger that might reappear again at some point.